This episode of Cello Chat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com.
Great, and now we're live.
All right, well, welcome everyone. So this is my practice studio at home. I just turned around so I can face the computer to talk to you all. So the topic of today is Audition Day. For some who maybe already follow me, it's the title also of a book I just published, this one. And so this book really was made to help all the people who have questions not only about how to play orchestral excerpt but also how to prepare for the audition itself. And so I just put in there all the things I have learned from my experience taking auditions, failing, winning auditions, and so I'm sharing that with you all. So I really, there are two parts in the book. So at the beginning you will see it's mostly text and also great cartoons from Jeffrey Curnow, who's a trumpet player in the Philadelphia Orchestra. And so I take you really from the time you see the repertoire list for the audition to the time you hopefully get tenure in your orchestra and celebrate the whole thing. And then the second part is really full of excerpts, and it's always laid out like this. So you have one side with the instructions and one side with the music. And the instructions are divided in a few sections. There's the focus points. There's a whole concept. There's just one line for the concept for the excerpt. And then what I call technical tips, but actually there are artistic tips as well. All the little things the committee is looking for, all the little things you should pay attention to, the classic mistakes that you want to avoid. So I hope this will be a helpful resource for a lot of young cellists who are getting started on the audition circuit. So I have a lot of ideas in there that are maybe a bit counterintuitive. For example, I mentioned in the book that I didn't touch my cello the day before the audition, or that I don't try to play better on the day of the audition. And I think for maybe a lot of you it's a bit strange, because you may think like you want to practice as much as possible and play your best on that day. But I found, at least for me, that it just added a lot more pressure, for example, to try to play better than I ever had played before, because I'm convinced from sitting on many audition committees that actually most people play worse on that day, which is totally normal because it's a very stressful situation for all of us. And so I think if you can play at your level and not play worse than you usually play, you're already doing a very, very good job. And the thing about not practicing the day before, I think in your mind, actually, if you work really hard, which I did before winning the principal position in Boston, if you work really hard the day before, I mean, what are you going to do that's going to make you even better? I didn't quite buy that. I felt like I had done my work. And also in your mind, I think it means that you really trust yourself, that you're going to go out the next day and play well, instead of thinking that maybe there are all those things you still have to fix, to make it right. So those are the kind of things I talk about in the book. Frankly, a lot of those things I looked for myself, a lot of it in the sports psychology world. There are a few books out there which I mentioned in the book about music performance. But this is all pretty new, and I think for many musicians, they've never heard anyone talk about that stuff. I know certainly when I was in school, we didn't talk about it. What it felt to perform, how to perform well, how to be consistent. We practice the phrasing, we practice the instrument, but the performance somehow gets pushed to the side, and so some people are good at it naturally, which is great, and some people have to figure it out. And I guess part of the reason for this book is to help people, to show people that they actually can figure it out, because I feel like that's what I did over my career. Even if it may look like I got a job very fast and everything was fine, I still learned a lot after that. So anyway, I suppose probably a lot of you are preparing auditions. I know we have one in Boston very soon, and we had a lot of applicants, so I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, if you have questions on orchestral excerpts, audition process, Boston Symphony, whatever works your boat, just let me know. I'll be waiting for the questions here. So I have a question about how to keep the nerves in check and keep both hands coordinated under pressure. Well, it's interesting that the question mentions both hands, because one thing I mentioned in the book is that it's very helpful to focus on one thing only. So there's a big difference between thinking like, oh, I need my right hand and left hand to work together perfectly, or to think I'm going to focus on having a calm bow, a steady bow, and very likely if you practice well, the left hand will just follow. So I think it's very helpful not to crowd your mind and your brain with lots of things to think about when you're playing. And I think if you hear, I like to watch the NBA, I like to watch golf, and if you hear sports people talk, about what, like, let's say what they think about when they shoot a 3-pointer, like they don't think, they just do it. And I think we have to have that mindset of just trusting our process, trusting our skills, and just doing it. So I do think a lot about the audition issues people come across, or that they show up on stage and suddenly they don't trust themselves. And so I think that's something we can all work on. All the committees want to hear good players, on the day of the audition. And so we always wish everyone the best, and we want everyone to play at their best. But I think that will come through candidates preparing the event as well as the music, not just the music. How do you improve shifts in Einheldenleben? Let me see. Of course, there are several ways of shifting. I know for me, I always think for positions for shifting. So, for example, the first one, I will definitely think about that first finger on the G to get to the B flat, and the same thing later. So that's how I shift most of the time. I always shifted that way. Very lately, I'm starting experimenting, shifting into the note instead of from the position, but that's still a bit new for me. I have some colleagues who do that very, very well. So whatever works, really. But I think it's important to know the map of the cello, and frankly, if you know your positions well, you should be able to shift and sense the space that you need to get to your shift. So that's my advice: is know which notes are on the way to the note you're getting at, right? Tips for warming up. I would say warm up like usual, but the day of the performance, I really think you shouldn't beat yourself up in the practice room anymore, even when you're at the hall between rounds. Maybe people have different methods. For me, all my BSO auditions, whether it was section or principal, were always 4 or 5 rounds in a day. You have finals, and then you have super finals, and then I don't know what they call it, mega finals, whatever. And so you're playing and playing and playing, and every round is more exhausting, And so if you're practicing a lot, between rounds, then you arrive on stage, you're tired. So it may seem funny for a lot of you, but I wrote in my book that between rounds I was doing a coloring book for adults, which just shifted my mind off the audition. Already I could totally forget about the audition, color my butterflies or whatever, and then get back to the process and be on for the stage, because that's the stage. It's the stage that matters. And so as far as warming up on the day, before the first round, I would warm up like usual. I wouldn't overdo it. Whatever gets, your fingers nimble and your vibrato, in check, and really also try to, I mean, it all depends on your personality, right? It's helpful to know how you work in those situations. For me, I'm a pretty mellow person. I may have to like sort of boost myself a little bit to be a bit more aggressive in my mindset. So I really, deliver convincingly on stage. Maybe for some other people, it will mean they need to just chill out a bit and just play calmly. But yeah, don't overdo it. Don't overplay outside of the stage. Question from Peter. Right, how to adapt to different conditions and sizes of concert halls and rooms? It's a very good question, and I feel very lucky because I only auditioned at Symphony Hall, which, like many of my colleagues told me, you arrive and you play your audition and you're like, wow, it sounds great, because it's a great room. So we're lucky here, and if you come audition for the BSO, you'll see how nice it is. My advice would be, I would think if you arrive for an audition or a concert in a very dry hall, don't try to force your sound, because that's what it's gonna sound like. It's gonna sound like a forced sound, and that's not appealing to anyone. And so everyone, once again, don't forget that everyone is on the same boat, right? We tend to think when we arrive to this thing that, we're the only one dealing with this and that, but everyone is on the same boat. So everyone is dealing with that acoustic. And so who do you think will do better? Is it going to be a person who plays like they always play, comfortably, or is it a person who's going to try to play louder, play stronger because they're trying to make up for the whole? The whole is none of your business. It's not part of who you are. So just focus really on yourself and play like you always play. Don't change a thing. Question from Michael. Can you discuss the process of developing your personal sound character within the context of an orchestral audition? So I'm guessing you mean how to project your personal sound within the context of an orchestral audition. So, one thing I believe strongly also is, what people notice in an audition, or actually not really the things that you will practice the 3 months before. Sadly, it's the things that were always part of your playing. So whatever makes you interesting as a cellist and musician, that's what people will pick up right away. So once again, you should just play however you are, and so that should come out just fine in the audition. I think we want to hear interesting musicians. That's another question I hear a lot is should I play, for example, we have arpeggione in Boston, should I play the arpeggione like in school? I don't know what that means. When we're in school, we're trying to make music also, and that's what we want to hear, in a BSO audition. We just want to hear beautiful music. So I think just be yourself, it's, and also, in the big scheme of life, I just don't think we should change who we are to fit something, anything. I think I'm probably in the BSO because I fit there, and maybe I won't fit in another orchestra or in a chamber group or something else. So, sort of, there's some relativity to the importance of who we are, and I think we should be who we are on stage, and happens what should happen. So questions from Jose Maria. I have a couple here. One is, do you have any advice for a principal cello audition? Well, I mean, principal obviously is a different job. Maybe people will expect a bit more personality from you. It's tough because they expect personality, but they also expect good taste and all those things. But I think you have to be very, very convincing with your phrasing, with your dynamics. It has to be like, the committee should not be able to argue with anything you're doing, because afterwards you're going to lead a section, and if you're giving them wrong ideas, it's not going to be a good thing. So I would say play with a lot of character. Obviously you should be technically very strong, and really have each excerpt, and it's valid for a section audition too, each excerpt be very accurate in its style, whether you play Debussy or Mahler or Beethoven or Mozart that really fits the style. And so don't play everything like Rachmaninoff or everything like Brahms. Really, the style should be really on point. He's also asking, what do you think when you have to play the Haydn D exposition? Once again, try not to think too much. So what do I think about when I play? Usually I'm thinking about the phrasing. I'm into the music. I try to be really fully immersed into the music and just sing. And I think the cello is such a great instrument because it has such a beautiful voice, and almost everything we do, whether it's Haydn D or Schumann Concerto or Arpeggione or Brahms Second Symphony or Wagner Tristan, I mean, it's all about singing, and so that's really what I think about. I'm really immersed into the piece and just trying to enjoy the beauty that hopefully comes out of the cello. Jihun is asking if I have some insight on advice for college auditions, because I'm on the faculty of the New England Conservatory now since a few weeks. I'm starting in the fall and I'm really excited about that. I think college auditions, it's a bit of the same. One new thing I can mention is actually what's missing usually in people who are not doing well in an audition under pressure are the basics. So it's intonation and rhythm, and that's before anything else. And so you can imagine if an orchestra was hiring, let's say, cellists, even if they play out of tune all the time, that would not make for a very good orchestra. And so it's very important that the basics are healthy. And I think as a teacher also I look for that. I look for already a pretty good setup, at least at the college level, so that we can get working on music, or also do I sense a passion in the student, a passion about music, a passion about the cello. Do they really want to improve? And so those are things maybe you can sense sometimes when people do the interview part, which can be interesting. But really you hear when people play if they're listening to what they're doing. If I hear someone and sometimes the intonation is high, sometimes it's slow, and they don't seem to care, it's not too attractive. So I think it's important to be very solid technically, and then as in an audition for an orchestra, to be very musical and play beautifully. And that's what all teachers dream to have, is students who are motivated and who play beautifully. Good question from Colin. Do you have any exercises to get control of your vibrato? My arm has a tendency to vibrate faster than I intend under pressure. That's a very good question, and welcome to the club, because I think pretty much all of us have a tendency to vibrate faster under pressure. So even when I listen to solos that I recorded my 30 on the job, I vibrate faster than I would now after 4 years in the position, because now I'm more comfortable and maybe my vibrato now is more accurate to what I really want to do. So my first advice actually is to practice a slow vibrato. Get used to playing with a slow vibrato, because then if you get a bit faster in the performance, well, it might still be okay. But if your vibrato is already very fast at home, when you're calm, then it's gonna get really a bit like an electric toothbrush when you get on stage and you're nervous. So I think it's important to work on that. And actually that's one of the things I remember when I first studied with Bernard Greenhouse that he told me about, and it was a bit surprising for me, but it's taken a long time to work on it. But now I'm closer to what I want to do. What I do want to mention is, very often the fast vibrato comes from tension in the arm and the fingers, also from the idea that we're vibrating from the hand, and so I always tell my students that not only you vibrate it's the whole arm that's vibrating, but also if you can think, really your shoulder blade is what gets the motion started. So for example here, I'm really feeling my shoulder blade here, and of course my shoulder blade is not going up and down and vibrating, but I know this is my first anchor for the whole my whole body parts after that lead to the note, right? this feels very comfortable actually because I'm relying on big muscles. So then when you're under pressure, the more you get used to this, the better you're going to do. And then also what's very important, and I talk about it in the book, is that the more you have good experiences, let's say you used to always have a fast vibrato, and then one day you have a concert or an audition, and suddenly you manage to slow your vibrato down and feel comfortable, then that can really stick in your memory and be an added boost that yes, you can do it, because I've done it once, so I can do it twice, and maybe I can do it all the time now, right? So of course it's not going to be perfect all the time, but if you work on it at home, if you work on slowing down your vibrato, which is about the width of the arm, and thinking about using your shoulder blade, and then applying that on stage, then I think you will get there. But if you're not practicing a slower vibrato at home, it's not gonna happen on stage or in the concerts. Question from Brennan: do I do anything in particular to help get a good sound at the tip without pressing? It's a very good question. I have a little bit of pronation in the bow, but really a little bit. And this is a long bow actually, so it's a bit more of a challenge. So that would be one advice, is to slightly pronate. That's the motion. Slightly pronate your arm into the stick, but not really pressing. You're just changing the balance of your arm on the bow, but you're not really pressing. I really don't like that word on the cello. The other thing, a lot of my friends know I'm crazy about balancing my bows. I've done and undone my winding so many times on all my bows until I get it right, and I still feel that a lot of students and don't sort of you buy a bow and maybe it sounds great, but you hate the balance, and then you don't change it. It's like, once you own the bow, if you want to change the way it's balanced, actually the winding is a very easy place to change that, because if your winding is too heavy as a frog, or if you use one of those big rubber tubes, nothing wrong with people who do that, but if you use one of those big rubber tubes, it really shifts the balance towards the frog, and that feels very comfortable at the frog, and then once you get to the tip, it's a struggle. Whereas if it's very, very well balanced, really you shouldn't have to do much to hold your sound until the end. So that's something I would look at, and most bow makers, if you go to them and you tell them, look, I'm having trouble doing this, is my bow really set up, is the balance really set up right, or could something be better? I think it's worth asking, because I think a lot of people, there's no rule that says when you buy a bow that you should keep the winding that's on there. There's no rule. So I think it's okay to experiment and find what you want. I have some bows that have silver windings. I have bows that have silk windings, and it's for whatever works for that bow. Question from Jonathan about how to control the sautille stroke in the Mendelssohn Midsummer Night Dream. I don't control it. It happens, and that's the number one problem in that excerpt. There's a big difference between I don't know if I can do it, but between controlling every note and the bow really should bounce naturally on the string. And I promise you, if you can get the bounce started and keep going, which is actually a very light motion, it's a really easy excerpt, but it becomes hard when we're trying to articulate each note. This is impossible. I don't know how anybody can do that. And it never sounds good when people do it. So, it's always tricky to teach that excerpt. It's really hard to explain. If we take a step back, I think, it's important to remember that motion of the bow on the string. And so if you think about that motion, and then it gets smaller, and then that's what you get when you have the sautille, And And so the hand and the fingers are very light, but the bow is controlled by the hand, but it's not tight, it's relaxed. And if you find the right spot in the bow, it will bounce. And that's another thing. Once again, if we have to trust our tools. It should not be that hard to play that excerpt because we have a bow that's made to do that on a cello. And so, for example, when I learned to play golf, very often it was frustrating. I couldn't hit the shots I wanted, and very often it's because I didn't trust the simple concept that if you hit down, the ball will go up. Because that's so strange for your brain. But it's the same thing with your bow. It's you really have to trust that it will do the work. The cello will work with the bow. It will work out. But you have to learn how to do that sautier in a light way. It should really not be tiring at all. And if you've been doing it the other way, where every note is articulated, I will try to unlearn that, because that's not going to help. Question from Travis. In what ways does playing in a professional orchestra differ from your work with chamber music? Do you approach orchestral and chamber repertoire differently? Not really. For me, it's all music making, and I talk about that also in the intro to my book. Which it's always music. Like sometimes we sing orchestral excerpts, or technical challenges, or sort of unfair ways to be tested and eliminated, and they're music, and so it's always music. And so I think it's important to always approach it with the search for beauty, for character, for imagination. Of course, playing in an orchestra, both orchestra and chamber music, you have to keep your ears open, because, for example, when I first started, being a principal cello, I had practiced really well my solo at home, and then maybe I show up to rehearsal, and then, one of the instruments playing a solo before me is gonna, finish it differently than I expected, and then it sort of changes the way I have to play after. And so you have to be very reactive and flexible. So this all works out, and nobody knows in the whole that it was not exactly what you planned for. So you have to be very reactive. Obviously, for me now, playing in an orchestra is different because I have to lead. I'll have the responsibility of, obviously counting the bars, which, this week we're doing Wozzeck, there's a lot of counting to do. And so, I have to count, make sure I'm very clear when I'm coming in so they can trust me. And then also, emphasize what I'm trying to do musically so that maybe they react behind me and go with me on those ideas. Whereas when I'm playing chamber music, I'm the only one responsible for my part, so maybe it will brush off on some of my colleagues, but it's really, I'm on my own. So that's the only difference. But really, it's all music, no matter if it's orchestra or chamber music or solo work. It's music. Question from Jacob: how does one achieve a sense of clarity in the Strauss excerpts? Don't want for intense. So, for example, Don Juan. It's pretty simple. Everybody plays it too fast at the beginning. We can't hear the notes. We can't hear the rhythm. It's always rushing. And so my biggest tip for this opening is really to aim for the second beat, because really what you want is clarity, because imagine if the whole orchestra is playing blah, 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 it's not very accurate depiction of what's on the page. So I would really aim for clarity and really of not rushing. And for example, at the end of that excerpt, when you have a very, very articulate left hand, so we really hear, first of all, the correct rhythm, and then we really hear the notes very, very clearly. I'm trying to see if I have another example here. Yeah, so there's a lot of that, legato, those legato passages, and always articulate the left hand. So this is very clear. Because that's the biggest challenge in that music, because it's so busy and there's so much going on, not only in your part but in the orchestra, that if it's not clear, imagine if each musician in the orchestra is not really that clear, nobody's going to buy the tickets. So my advice is really to go for clarity, however you can achieve it. Question from Miguel: do you use any etudes by Popper, Grossmacher for your orchestral excerpt preparation? So it's really depends on do I use them now? Not really. Sometimes I do the poppers, but I think it's been a couple of years, to be honest. I think there's a time for everything, and so when I was a student in Paris, when I was, I don't know, say 17 through 21, I did a lot of that stuff, like a lot of Gustav Mahler and Piatti, and so, that was really formative in a way. Also earlier I did all the Romberg and Davidoff concertos, which for some reason I don't hear a lot in the States, which surprises me a bit. But those were really helpful to like get used to dealing with technical challenges, and also, dealing with styles of concertos that were not yet the big pieces of the repertoire. Because I think if you arrive on big pieces of the repertoire, and you don't yet have the technical tools to play that piece well, it's not such a great idea. But sorry, I'm drifting away. So whatever you need. So if you feel, I do feel sometimes when I play more like proper etudes for a couple of weeks that it settles me a bit better, maybe in my left hand or in my bow, and so if that makes you feel more comfortable after for performing excerpts, sure, go for it. It all depends on what you need. I think if you ask a lot of, there are cellists who will play scales, until they can't play the cello anymore. I don't really play that many scales anymore because I've done them. I think I know my way around the cello, and I have so many notes to learn, and anyway every week it's not, I don't have the time to do scales. So really whatever you need. If it helps you, sure, go for it. Would you share a bit on Bernard Greenhouse's personality and his approach with his students? Well, I can tell you what it was for me. So I met him when I think I was probably 19, I think 18 or 19. He was doing a master class with Louis Claret at Fontfroid in the south of France, where Louis still teaches. And so for me, those lessons were really shocking in a way. It was maybe it sounds exaggerated, but it's not. But it was a bit of an out of body experience when he told me how to phrase something, or how to shape a shift, or how to use my vibrato, and then I would do it, and then I it would sound so good. I would be like, is it really me doing this? Because I had never done it before. And so I think for me that's why it was such a breakthrough, because he gave me so many really like technical tools to make music with, because making music is the end game really. And he could be tough. I think a lot of people in that generation, they had the habit of imitating the student in a bad way to emphasize what was wrong, and then play it better to show them how it's done. And so it's fine. I'm happy to take it. Obviously he knows much more than me, but I think he was really always looking for imagination in the playing, and I think that's what I look for also when I listen to people. Are they creating something? Is it interesting? Or are they involved in everything they're doing? Do they control really what they're doing? Because I do feel like a lot of people don't really control what they're doing. The bow does what he wants, the left hand does what it wants, and I think if you really control your phrasing, you're in charge of everything, which also takes bad surprises a lot out of the equation. So yeah, I think he was very generous, because for example when he made that trip to France, it was a big trip for him. He was already in his 90s, and it's not easy to make a trip like this, and he was very generous with his time, and I really learned a lot from him. Like I said, he's the one who talked about my vibrato, and of course I wish he was here today to see that it sort of worked out for me, but he had a good life. But it was a really important experience for me, and I think he was also connected to all those schools from before. He studied with Casals and Feuermann, and so he had some pretty good stuff to say. Oh, question from Olen. Could you please share your thoughts on what one's priorities should be when playing a moment of a Bach suite for an audition? That's a very good question. I don't put a Bach suite in the section audition list in Boston, because I find it a bit hard to judge. I mean, you can judge you can see the style of someone, the phrasing, but there are so many ways to play Bach. It was actually funny, a while ago we played a concert with some of my BSO colleagues, which played one suite, and even though we're all in the same orchestra, we're all so extremely different, and so Bach is so personal, and so I think just play however you are. I mean, once again, it's always the same thing. Like you don't want to go through life and try to change, who you are. You improve yourself, yes. Improve your playing, yes. But changing deeply, how you want to play things, I don't think it's the point at all. So I think the priority should be the style. I mentioned in the book when I did the principal audition, I did I think it was the Allemande from the third suite. And I knew it was something I knew very well. I knew it was something that's maybe pleasant to listen to, not too dramatic, a bit more lighthearted, which in audition can be nice for the comedy too. The one advice I do give in my book also, I shouldn't tell you everything that's in my book, but the one advice I give also is not necessarily to pick the hardest thing. I mean, so many people think like, oh, I'm gonna play something from the sixth suite and I'm gonna impress them all and crush all the others. And maybe, but what if they don't even ask for the Bach, which is very often there are pieces on the audition list that people never listen to, or what if they ask for it and you're actually having a bad day and you just really don't play it well that day, and there you're gonna really wish you had the third suite or second suite under your fingers. So I would be careful, because once again, when you take an audition, you have a whole repertoire to manage, and you don't want to make it too hard on yourself. So I would be a bit conservative with my Bach choices. For the comedy, it's mostly about the style, more than anything else. Question from Hans: could you elaborate on what it is like to arrange pieces for cello ensembles? Especially the commission from Yo-Yo Ma. Well, I mean, it's been great. I wish I could keep doing it, but now I do have to practice my cello a bit more than before. I loved arranging for several reasons. I mean, one is the fact that I get to play with my colleagues after with the Boston Cello Quartet and so on. And also, whenever I did that, I just really could dive into the piece and understand what the composer did. And so it always struck me, for example, when I arranged Mozart overtures for 4 or 5 cellos, that he's just using the same 2, 3, maybe 4 max elements in the whole overture, and it's going up and down, it's changing keys, it's reverse, and it's so smart, but it's so economical in a way. And I was like, every time I see that, I'm like, I'm sort of laughing, I'm like, oh, this smart dude, So I really like that. I really like that I get to know the piece deeply, understand the meaning of it, how the composer achieved it, and really when you arrange, you really understand that very well. And then the commission for Yo-Yo, it was Vaughan Williams, the Thomas Tallis theme that we played at Tanglewood, and that was great. I mean, it was a fantastic ensemble. We had the Boston Cello Quartet plus Yo-Yo, Mike Bloch, Giovanni Solima, and Monica Lescobar. So that was like all top cellists. And so when you arrange for people like that, you don't think like, oh, I can't go past the D in some position, or you just whatever sounds best, you write it. And so that's always very exciting, and I think you see more and more of that. Now on my website, Opus Cello, I also publish other arrangers like Sébastien Warnier, who's principal at La Monnaie in Brussels, and I'm having a new arranger from France who's joining the team this year, and they write arrangements basically like me too. They are challenging, but that sound really great, and I think the level is so high now in cello playing that's the direction cello ensemble will go. Even though of course I wish I could write very accessible arrangements, and I have some that are easier, but I think there will be more and more people who are able to play more challenging arrangements, but that sound really, really amazing. Question from Laura. How do you adjust the ears when you're used to play at a certain pitch, for 40 for example, but need to play higher or lower? That's a very good question. I'm thinking maybe trying to adjust is not the way. Basically, I would hope that you can just tune the instrument right and then just play your positions as you always would. I feel like maybe I react, maybe I instinctively react, with my intonation on the cello, depending on what I play, on who I play with, or the intonation is higher generally. I may adjust on the cello itself. But once again, if it's an audition, you don't want to mess up with your mind too much. There's already enough to mess with it. So just tune and just deliver what you've been practicing before, and that's it. Don't question things too much. I think. I have another question about the wide vibrato. I think I don't know if Mark arrived a bit later. I addressed a bit earlier that the vibrato really comes from the shoulder blade. It's a whole arm is in motion. It's not the fingers. It's a relaxed motion. And really I do feel like a relaxed vibrato is the way to go if you want to have a long career. For me it's very tiring to vibrate fast. I can't really do it. But I think just slow it down. If your vibrato is usually, it's just about trying to have a larger wave, in your vibrato. So for me, it really helps to think about my back, about having my shoulder blade be the anchor for my arm, and the rest is free, It's generous and easy. Once again, I don't believe in playing the cello as something being hard and challenging physically. If it's hard for you, maybe switch your methods because you want to play for a long time. Can I recall a specific piece of advice from any of my teachers that has proved to be particularly impactful throughout your career? I have a lot of them. Really. I think the most important one, which I heard both from Philippe Muller and Lawrence Lesser, is to be very convincing with your character, right? And Philippe Muller used to tell me, if you're not convinced, you're not convincing. And Lawrence Lesser always emphasized playing things with a lot of character, and he's very good at that when he plays also. And I think that's very important, because that's really what's striking for the imagination of the listener. And that's what music is all about. It's about images, imagination, characters, and so that's the first thing people hear. Actually, whether it's an audition or a concert, very often we may be upset after about a wrong note, but really what people remember is a character of your playing. And so even the very top players in the world, they all make mistakes in concerts. They all have a note that's not that great, all of them, I know they all sound great on the recordings, and they do sound great in the hall too, but it's never perfect. Nobody is perfect, but what they're really good at is playing with a lot of character, lots of passion, lots of emotion, and that's what the audience is coming to the hall for, is not to hear, just someone playing tune. That's not really that convincing. So I think playing everything with character is the most important thing I remind myself of very often from my teachers. Question from Ali, who has issues with naking right thumb. I tend to grip my bow too hard sometimes. Then don't grip it. I know it may sound easy, but there's really no. Once again, we want to use the big muscles, right? So, when we do this, when we really try to grab the bow, is because we're somehow worried if we don't hold it strong enough, it's gonna drop or something. But how do we draw the bow? We draw the bow with the arm, and with that portion of the arm first. So all you want here is, I don't know how to hold the bow. Look, my teacher told me to put my hand like this and then put it on the bow, and that was it. And I always held my bow that way. So I I haven't changed anything, and I don't press. I don't have any tension there, because I'm using my arm. I'm barely feeling the bow, and I think it's important for freedom. Also the stick is supposed to vibrate. I can't imagine if you're pressing on it. Very important to be free. And sorry to go back to golf, but the same thing. Like the teachers always tell you not to grip the club too hard. So you need to feel free. So maybe you first of all, maybe you use too much this part of your arm instead of this one. So I would really experiment. Here I'm using only this. This is not doing anything, and that gives you a core and power without any effort. Because pressing with the thumb is not a great idea. So you have to get used to the feeling that you're maybe controlling less with this, but more here. And I think that should help you with your thumb. When a committee asks for a movement of Bach, how does one choose which one? So I talked about Bach earlier, but basically maybe they will ask for a movement from a specific suite, or they ask for a dance or a prelude from any suite. So choose the one that's gonna be the easiest for you. I like I said, Bach is really for style. So it's not, once again, choosing the sixth suite because you think it's gonna be better or more impressive than the others is very often not gonna work. So just pick whatever you're comfortable with, because it's a big audition list. What are my views on non-vibrato as a way to create color musically? Well, I mean, why not? Sometimes it works. Sometimes it works. I actually, very often when I practice without vibrato. Just try to shape the phrase with the bow, and then the vibrato is there to enhance the music. Like anything with vibrato, as long as you control it, it's your idea. If you don't control it, then I'm not okay with that. Because then it's not an artistic choice. You're just a victim of your instrument and your left hand, and so that I'm really not okay with. And I hear it a lot. Even very good players, sometimes they have habits in vibrato and they never change it. So I'm very interested in vibrato. There's so many ways to play a note. You can play. You can play. You can play. There's so many ways. You can also play with a small vibrato. You can play with a wide vibrato. There are so many ways to play a note, and I think that should matter on unfortunately almost every note you play. And I don't hear that a lot, and that's one thing I learned also from Bernard Greenhouse. That every note has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and what are your choices that make sense for the music. But yeah, so non-vibrato is okay if it makes sense, in some pieces. Very often in orchestra you want non-vibrato for a color, it's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with it. And so I think, as long as it's a choice, fine. After, of course, if you play Brahms with non-vibrato, some people will have, problems with that, maybe more than in Bach, but I think that sort of makes sense. So question from Arseny about the left hand. The impulse goes from the shoulder through the elbow to the finger, or the shoulder does not need to be used. So I'm not sure if you're talking again about vibrato or just the impulse of the fingers. I'm trying to understand your question. From the shoulder through the elbow. I mean, the way my left hand fingers go on the fingerboard is with the weight of the arm, of the shoulder, the arm, and they just, I think both hands when I play drop, and that's what creates the contact point. It's not pressing, it's dropping. And so that's how I approach my left hand to that. The pressure happens from resting the finger on the fingerboard, not pressing down into the fingerboard, right? And that's also a whole different concept, and the more you get used to it, the easier it is. And then I don't really I don't even see it as an impulse. because it's like, it's like if I had a shelf, if my shelf was closer and I could rest like this, it's the same feeling, except now it's on a fingerboard and I can rest like this. So it's a resting motion. I don't know if it's really an impulse motion. I mean, you may have articulation from the fingers, but that's very light, but otherwise it's a resting motion. Question from Claire: do I use the same cello as a principal that I would playing section? It seems you will need a more soloistic instrument as principal and more of a blended sound in the section. Well, I mean, I think you can probably have any instrument blend into a section. In the BSO, almost all of my colleagues have really high-level instruments that could be solo instruments. Of course, if you're principal cello, I got this cello. I think the first time was 6 months before the first principal audition, and I knew that my cello, which is over there, which is a very nice German cello, was good, but not quite at the level I would probably have to compete with at the audition, because I know some of my colleagues play Strads and Montagnards and whatnot, and I wasn't gonna do it with that. So I look for something that projects well, and if I have any advice for buying an instrument is of course the investment has to make sense, but buy for the sound. Don't buy for the name. Really buy. So this is a Mokotel, and I knew who Charles-Adolphe Mokotel was. I knew he made good cellos. So, but mostly what I loved, is the sound. It was easy to play, projected well, and it was affordable for me. At the time it was the max of my budget, but I could afford it, and so I went all in on it, and that was a great choice. So of course, if you're principal, you need a cello that projects well. But once again, it's not always just the instrument. Very often, a player can play on any cello and sound just the same. So it really always comes down to what kind of player you are. Ellen, again about asking for a movement of back. I think you can go back in the video because I addressed that twice already. Obviously a very good question. So I have a question about could you please outline a process of preparation practicing the contemporary music selection in an audition? How important is contemporary music in one's total audition process? I would think contemporary music is once again about having a clear message. So now if you have ponticellos, if you have pizzicatos, if you have col legno, if dynamics, all that has to be very, very clear. I mean, no matter who the composer is. That's actually something I had in mind too when I made the list for the BSO. I feel like maybe there should be some newer music in there, because that's really part of our job, and so I think it's always about the clarity of what's on the page. So if you can transmit what's on the page, whether it's new music or Brahms or Haydn, that's really what you want to do. Is if the committee is listening to you with the music, they want to hear what they see on their page. As a teacher, what top 3 technical concepts do you find students have the most trouble grasping? Oh, that's 3 is a lot. I mean, the first one I always talk about is using the back portion of the arm to produce sound, because a lot of students try to make sound first of all by raising the elbow and pressing to the cello like this, and by using their forearm. And not only using their forearm this way, but also, basically, my idea is it's not just my idea, but the concept is that if you start a note, by releasing your forearm, you gave away your power. That's it. You're done. You're cooked. How are you gonna have sound now? You gave out all your leverage. Whereas if you start with the back of your arm, then you're good for the whole bow. So that's really the number one thing. I always talk about is to use the back of the arm. So we start the bow stroke with the back of the arm. Later we open the forearm, maybe the wrist, but maybe not, and the opposite on the way back. Okay, and I think it's a very healthy way to use the bow, and it really works. Now trying to think about other concepts. I probably talk a bit about vibrato too, obviously, because I feel it's so often overlooked. So where is the vibrato taking you? Where is the, actually if you find just two more, I would say vibrato and bow speed, because also like if you pull a note, is it like this? Is it like this? Is it like this? What is your bow speed? How much of the bow are you using? Once again, I think great artists think about that stuff, and if you're not thinking about it, where you're not having all the best tools to sound good. So that's really one important thing, is how to manage your bow. And then the vibrato also, you have a direction in your sound. And so often when people struggle with legato, what almost always works is to save a bit of bow and add a bit of bow speed at the end of the bow, and widen your vibrato. So it's easier to hide than if you have, because it's hard to make that connection. A wider connection with the vibrato is easier, and having the bow speed, it sort of smoothes the motion. So I think it would be the back of the arm for the bow speed, and the vibrato, probably top three. Question from Logan. Could I elaborate on how I developed my career after conservatory? Well, I went straight into the BSO section. I was very happy there. There was a principal audition, took it twice, got it the second time. I knew I loved orchestra. I knew the BSO was a great orchestra, great hall, great conductors. So I was lucky. It was pretty straightforward. What do I think about Yargar strings? Yes, I play with Yargar strings on top, spiral core on the bottom. I've played with Versum a few years too. I just like the clarity of the Yargars. I think it's pretty hard to beat spiral core, I think. How piano do you recommend to consider about Beethoven's second and third movements, especially in the slow parts? So I'm guessing you mean Beethoven 5. I'm not sure which symphony you're talking about. How piano? Well, I mean, we should still hear you, right? And especially this one, should still sing out, right? So not too soft, not too soft, but not loud either. Just comfortable. I'm hurrying a bit because I think we have to wrap up soon. I have tickets for the Joshua Bell Lambert concert in April. What are some of the challenges for the principal for that concert? It's a good question. I'm actually going to be off for that concert. But the challenge in the Lambert excerpt for me, we have this long excerpt, but where was I think the French horn, the English horn, sorry, and so for me that's the biggest challenge, is I have the distance with my colleague Rob Shina, who plays beautifully the English horn, and so that's my biggest challenge, is to match sort of his timing. Also, I'm like, I joined the principal club later, so I sort of try to follow what he's doing. But it's really matching things with him. And so the first time I did it, I think at Tanglewood, we actually rehearsed a bit on stage, just the two of us, so I could get a sense of what he wanted to do. So that's the biggest challenge. And then I for the section excerpt, I really trust my section, and they played great, so it's just no worries there. Alex is asking what advice I have for left arm discomfort. I've been playing for 25 years and fear for the future if I can't take care of physical conditioning. I mean, physical conditioning can matter, whether it's actually exercising or getting a massage or regularly. Whatever, helps and that you can afford, it's good to do it. Once again, for the left side, I think this concept of pressing into the fingerboard is really what's gonna create problems everywhere in your back, in your arm, in your fingers, your hand. So I think it's very important to really just learn how to rest the fingers on the fingerboard. And one last tip, I mean, we would need an hour for this, is also, instead of trying to make more sound, by pressing very vertically on the fingerboard, try to use more of the meat on your finger and flatter. And that helps actually with the wider vibrato, and it's more comfortable, and it's a richer sound, I think. Last question. How has your perspective as a musician and artist changed throughout your career? I don't think it has changed. Well, I mean, yes, something evolved, maybe when I was younger, I did worry a lot about, being in tune and all that stuff, because it seems when you're in school, that's the biggest challenge, is to play in tune. And now I'm trying to bring in more emotion and all that stuff. The biggest thing that has changed is, I think, I always had strong ideas about a lot of things musically, and I was not very outspoken. So if people who play chamber music with me, I rarely say anything, because people have so many ideas already. Like, why should I bring mine up? But I think the fact that I became principal and now people are actually curious to hear what I have to say, maybe I have more belief now in my ideas, and I'm like, maybe they're not bad ideas, in fact. So I think over time I just built my belief in my system, in how I play the cello and music. So just more belief, I think, in myself. So thank you all for coming. I hope this was interesting. I was sort of glad that we didn't just stay on excerpts, because really excerpts, once again, or just music, and that's how I approach them. If you're curious about the book, it's available in many places, on my personal website, on the Opus Cello website, at Carriage House and Johnson Strings, at Isaac Salco in New York City, and Southwest Strings also. So yeah, I hope this was helpful to you, and I wish you all the best for your audition.